I have been researching the same type of problems that everybody else has for the last 10 or 20 years, or in my own case about 25. And before we get too much into it, I just have one photo to show. And this is the front page of the Edmonton Journal business section from 25 years ago, when I beat the Eaton's company in a small claims action that was going to cost them $720 million. And this was in April of 1990. And it set me on a path of observation of the system in this country that will just blow your mind what's going on out there in the real world. And when I got involved in this, with a number of people. One was Larry Whaley from Nanaimo, and was known as the borrower's advocate, and I educated him with my expertise and what I did. And I've spent the last 25 years examining the system and analyzing it and reading pathologically. I've read about 1,000 books and maybe 1,000 law court decisions on the broadly defined concept of English law, or with respect to creditor law, spanning a period of roughly 400 years. And I've identified what I call 7 dragons, 7 absolute, no question things that are fundamentally evil, what's called mala in se, evil in and of themselves, and that need to be stopped before we can really have any serious discussion about doing anything, because these things are so flagrant that they'll just blow your mind. And so I'll start with the most mild one, and I'll just give you a brief synopsis of each of the 7 dragons and why they need to be slain and how and what we can do to make it work. I'll put my glasses on so I can see people. Okay, the first is just what I call the phantom loan technique, or the falsification of account techniques. Okay, I spent about a 3-year period, 1995 through 1998, examining operating accounts at small businesses across Canada, and the chartered banks and the financial institutions generally are simply systematically looting them. They will falsify your account record. The one I use as an example is a home hardware franchise near Kenora, Ontario, where, okay, he's got a $92,000 payment due. They do an automatic debit. They say, no, we dishonor it. They charge him, this is back in the 80s, $16 as an NSF charge, but they increase the balance even though they didn't do the automatic debit. It was a royalty payment back to the franchise head office. So, and it really wasn't his fault, but regardless, they left it there for 4 days, this $92,000 debit that converted a $10,000 credit balance to an $84,000 overdraft balance, and then they charged him $200 interest for that 4 days on the $84,000 difference at the end of the month. Now, over the 1-year sample period that I did from August of 1990 to the end of August 1991, the bank, this is the Bank of Montreal, pulled the same stunt 29 times. And they burned him for approximately $1,200 over the course of that year. So I started looking for this and examining it. And every single financial institution in Canada is systematically doing the same thing. It's about $100 million a year business in and of itself. And that was back in 1998. And it keeps compounding. It keeps compounding because it involves so many different offenses under the criminal code, you can, including racketeering, even piracy. And so anyways, that's the first one. That's the most minor one that I've discovered out there. The second one is what I beat Eaton's on, and that is the so-called nominal method of interest calculation. If what they do is, if you look at every time you agree to underwrite debt, you are agreeing metaphorically to be injected with a virus. And you need to know 2 things. How fast does that particular virus that's being injected into my socioeconomic body, how fast does it grow? And a separate and distinct question is, how much do I have to feed it? And how often to stabilize it, to prevent it from getting any larger? Now, you make that comparison. How fast does the virus grow? And how much do I have to feed it at 3% per annum? They're virtually identical. And it doesn't matter how often you feed the thing, because it's only 3% a year, it doesn't make much difference. It's only going to grow a little bit. But by the time you get to something like 100% per month, if you're talking like the payday loan industry, as they call it, well, 100% a month is 409,600% per year. But you can stabilize it by feeding the thing 100% a month. So you go into a payday loan store, and they will tell you that rate of interest, the effective annual rate of interest, is 1,200%. But they're giving you the aggregate feeding schedule and not the rate of growth of the debt virus. Now, this was recognized in the United Kingdom 40 years ago in 1974. They do it right over there. They calculate interest using the mathematically correct formula because the Canadian method is recognized as false and seriously misleading, and it is prohibited outright as criminal fraud. And yet for 40 years, nobody notices anything. Nobody says anything, except occasionally, and this is what's really happening, is it doesn't matter how big a splash you make initially. It's like pouring gasoline into the carburetor, if anybody remembers those things on cars. It'll start the thing in the cold and it'll roar to life, but if the powers that be turn off the fuel supply, it's not going anywhere. And we've witnessed this for 25 years, and just it went as a sort of a ratcheting process, and then it would fall back, and then they'd pull all of these manipulations. And you got to ask the question, what is the likelihood that the Royal Bank of Scotland is not aware that its corporate sibling, the Royal Bank of Canada, is using a fraudulent formula to calculate $10 billion a day in interest revenue globally? All financial institutions everywhere, between the time the sun came up this morning and the time it comes up again tomorrow morning, that's another $10 billion of brand new debt, and therefore brand new money is created using a mathematically bogus formula in 80% of the world that has been prohibited outright as criminal fraud in the UK since 1974. And the same people who own the banks own the newspapers and all the media, and they won't even talk about it. Okay? Now that's the second thing. The third dragon is these credit card fees. These concealed credit card fees are just ridiculous. You are looking at a macro picture of Visa and MasterCard, American Express, all the oil cards. If you take the whole lot of them, they are burning through something like between $5 and $10 million a day in administrative charges. Okay, that is what they're actually spending at 4 cents a transaction or 3 cents a transaction. It's huge. It's almost $3 billion a year and in administrative charges, or about maybe 7 to 8 million a day if you want to narrow it down. I personally think it's only about 5 million a day, but we'll go with 5 million a day just to make the contrast. Okay, so the official story is they have to charge the interest payers really high interest rates, like 20%, which is nominal 20%, it's really 22%, and then because to make up for all the money they lose on the free riders who pay off their balances every month in full. Now, in fact, the merchant, in order to take Visa, MasterCard, or any of these credit cards, they have to agree to give a price discount to the card user. The merchant does not pay money to the bank. The merchant receives 97 cents on a dollar, or 97 for 100, and then at the end of the grace period, the concealed interest charge that corresponds to the price discount is physically paid to the bank, not by the merchant, but by the card user, who at the end of the grace period, which they recount for internally as an interest accrual period. And all of the banks have to acknowledge that this is interest revenue, and it's the only entity in the entire global society that doesn't recognize these things as interest charges are the card holders or the card users, who are told that there is no such concealed credit charge and that you should just keep ramming those purchases through your credit card account in order to take advantage of the banks and their free loan system. That's how stupid they think we are. And this is now over 25 years, since 1980. This has come up before Parliament 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, roughly once every 8 years. I was invited to give evidence at the 1992 one, which is when I discovered these merchant concealed credit charges. See, the reality of the banking business is, or the credit business, is that if the cardholder does not pay, then the bank never receives the merchant fee. And it's just that they say, okay, you want to take Visa, you have to give a 3% price discount to any user of a Visa card so that we can collect a concealed 3% credit charge at the end of the grace period while deceiving our cardholder into believing that they've received a free loan, free credit. So if you then look at this entire thing, you've got, say, $5 million a day here in actual physical administrative charges at 3 cents a transaction to actually process the pieces of paper in the electronic blitz. So for $5 million a day, they are charging on the outstanding balances $250 million a day in interest on the outstanding balances in daily interest on those accounts. It comes in at $250 million a day, and they're forced to do that to compensate for $5 million a day in actual expenses. And then they've got a second side, they're working the other side of the street, but it's actually charging the cardholder twice on the same money, and that's $500 million a day. See, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's almost $200 billion a year is being systematically skimmed off the top of the global economy by these, running these purchases through the so-called free loan system. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So they're in every way, and no matter what you look at it, they're constantly sucking liquidity out of the economy. The economy is like a there's hyperinflation going on in the financial economy, and it needs to be balanced by a hyper vacuum effect in the real economy, which constantly sucks liquidity out of the economy at just well, $10 billion a day in interest, new interest charges that accrue every single day. You've got, every time you can put that thing through, they got, in Canada, the chartered banks are skimming over $1 million a day in GST revenue because they charge the merchant discount on the federal and provincial tax revenue that is run through the system. So they're making, in 1990, when I was investigating American Express, they were collecting $10 million in handling fees on the Canadian GST for the first year of operation in 1991 for every $1 million they were paying in nominal Canadian income taxes. They're actually making a profit on it. Okay, so that's the first, second, and third dragons. The fourth one, this is where they get serious. This other stuff is all little stuff. It's huge, but it's minor. The fourth one has got to do with the systematic falsification and trafficking in legal forgeries by the legal profession on mortgages. You go into the lawyer's office. What's the first thing you do? You sit down, you sign a document, you swear under oath and penalty of perjury, I am the existing registered owner of this property that I merely intend to buy, and I have already received the loan proceeds from the bank. Both of those statements are categorically false. What is the reality of it? What is your real intent when you sit down in that chair? Your real intent is that if the bank advances me the principal amount, then I will pay the bank these monthly payments and the final one when it is due. But they get you to sign and swear under oath that not only do they omit to mention the fact that the bank has that liability, they actually get you to falsify and swear under oath that it is not true. The bank has absolutely no liability to me. I've already received the loan proceeds. So you're swearing that this is a certified liability of the borrower. The money's already been paid, like a certified check has already been paid into the account, when in fact it is what's called an executory or yet to be executed agreement. And it's a legal forgery. And it's not just a technicality, because the bank then takes the signed receipt you give it, and that is its own and only contribution to the loan account, is the falsified receipt that it receives from you. Now, the reason you do it this way, or they get you to do it this way, is the bank is committing a legal and equitable fraud against you by obtaining the financial substance of it, what it's doing from you. You give them the falsified receipt. That's the only thing it contributes. And you can turn around and sue them in equity jurisdiction for the legal fraud and the equitable fraud that they have taken away from you by failing to credit you for your underwriting of the debt. You just, and anyway, so the way they do it that way is because now your hands are dirty. You are the legal author of that falsified security, and you are barred from taking them into a court of equity to get a relief from that. And that's the purpose of the lawyer in the transaction. It is to induce you to commit a strict liability felony offense so that the bank can traffic in the falsified documents that they are obtaining from you as a condition of the loan.
And you just created those funds out of thin air for the...
No, you don't. You don't create the. Well, you're right in terms of the substance of it, but you're not. Your act of qualifying for the mortgage is payment in and of itself in that system, and it would work. You just have to qualify. But once you're dealing with a system, all money is one of two things. Either it's substance, such as gold or silver, coins and bullion, or it is information. Say it's not paper, it's not fiat, all that other stuff. Either it's substance or it is information. And in point of fact, 98% of it is information. And in an information exchange system, the act of agreeing you owe is payment in and of itself. And that's why they use this. If what's being done is a loan of substance, where it costs the lender as much as it gains the borrower, then that's an equity loan. But if it's just an advance of credit, where I'm only underwriting the risk that the debtor is going to default, then it becomes an inflationary ratcheting process. It's a pyramid scheme. And you're just constantly underwriting more debt. If you look at your actual credit card agreements, it says, I agree to pay the bank the monthly balance no matter how it arises. See, that's an insurance contract. It is not a money lending contract or a credit contract. It is an insurance contract. That's why, see, the banks are not actually paying the merchants. They're only agreeing that they owe them. In England, it's 100 billion pounds a month. 12 months, 1.2 trillion pounds a year being run through the Visa and MasterCard system, but the banks aren't actually paying the merchants. They are just saying, okay, at the beginning of the year, we owe the merchants £1 trillion. At the end of the year, they owe them 2.2 trillion, 1.2 trillion more. Meanwhile, the card users have been going to work 25 days a month to earn 100 billion every payment cycle to give cash to the bank 12 times. And at the end of that, they've given the bank 1.2 trillion pounds in cash, and the bank has put it all in its pocket and says, yeah, but we owe the merchants 1.2 trillion more, so that's consideration.
Sounds like a never-ending promissory note or something.
It is. It's just a constant rolling. It can never stop once it's set in motion. And another way to put it is the chartered banks in Canada still owe every last dollar they have ever purportedly loaned to anyone. So in 1968, it was like $32 billion. Now it's $2 trillion and $32 billion. They now have $2 trillion worth of assets that they didn't have in 1968, and they haven't produced so much as a widget in the meantime. It's just a constant rollover of these receipts that you give them for money they've paid you that they haven't. And anyways, that's is that the fourth dragon? The fifth dragon is loan fees. Loan fees are always and everywhere illegal. Parliament has attempted to make them illegal on a dozen occasions since 1880, and every single time the courts just pulls another weasel word manipulation to say we can't possibly enforce that law because then lawyers wouldn't be able to conceal their fees as part of the principal sum of a credit advance. And it keeps going and going and going until 1981 when they made it criminal under the criminal code. You cannot capitalize interest in advance without violating the criminal interest rate law because the rate of conversion is infinity. And that was brought to the attention of the Senate Banking Committee in the fall of 1980. They said, well, what about a standby fee, Senator? The rate of interest, being infinite, would certainly be above 60%. Could not the bank be charged with receiving a interest at a criminal rate for a standby fee? But the same reasoning applies to any kind of loan fee that is capitalized in advance, which is illegal under GAAP regardless. And the answer was, theoretically, yes, Senator. That is why this section of the criminal code is somewhat unique in that it requires the express permission of the Attorney General in order for criminal proceedings to be initiated. Okay? So they're taking a precisely defined criminal act under the criminal code that is also recognized under the general heading of fraud and GAAP. They're violating the accounting rules. It's leverage, leverage, leverage. The loan fees alone, a 2% loan fee at 12% on a 25-year mortgage will leverage the total interest cost, the total dollars out of your pocket by about 30%. It's just it's the way that the phenomenon works, anyways. So, and it gets to the point where it's you've got things like this, the one BC that I use for Vancouver. Okay, these guys. Couple goes to an investment advisor. They put up $780,000. And they're going to invest it to a mortgage broker. The mortgage broker takes it to this condo development in Vancouver and advances them $418,000 of it, provided they will sign a mortgage claiming that they had received $780,000 and an unconcealed or an unregistered side agreement for a $2,000 of legal fees, a $10,000 forget what it was, and a $350,000 bonus for making the loan. Okay? So the real rate of interest on the thing was just absolutely astronomical, but it averaged about it was just flagrantly contrary to GAAP because under the agreement the entire $362,000 of interest in advance accrued over one day. You get 418, at the end of the day you owe 780,000. The rate of interest was just astronomical, but it was the banks had pulled the rug out from underneath the interest rates or jacked them up in the early 90s, and this development went bankrupt, and this is what the lawsuit, and when they filed their claim, they were claiming for 4,800% was the effective rate on the thing 2 months later when the deal fell apart. Now, so if you're the investor, you're finding out that they took your $780,000 and gave you back a mortgage as security that said they were charging prime plus 2, when in fact they were charging 4,800% and had taken $362,000 of your funds and stuffed it into their own pocket, and they just happened to run afoul of the criminal code doing it, the criminal interest rate section, and they falsified all the documents to conceal that they were receiving what they had done. And there was over a dozen hardcore racketeering offenses, and yet nobody in the civil court, all of the legal professionals there, they didn't have a clue that there was even anything inappropriate with this. And the court said, well, yes, we're bound by the Thompson decision that criminal acts committed by financial institutions and their legal counsel are not fundamentally illegal because the criminal code only states that you will be severely punished. It does not expressly state that you shall not do it. It's that stupid what's going on out there. And nobody will report on it. Nobody will in the mainstream because they're all owned by the same people. I'm not suggesting a conspiracy. These people haven't got the collective brains to organize a conspiracy to tie their shoelaces. It's all done by just this force of everybody knows where it has to go, and they pretend to be stupid with the rest of it. And George Orwell talked about it. It's called Crime Stop, Protective Stupidity. And so we go through that, and then, okay, that's the fifth one. The sixth dragon is the deposit function. which is the most ridiculous thing we've got out there. It's been going on for 400 years or 320 years. If I win the lottery today, some super multi-state Powerball lottery, $1 billion in cash, 100 million people paid $10 a piece to win it, or to take a chance. And my numbers come up, and I've got $1 billion in cash. It's mine and I own it. And the very next day when I deposit it in the bank, it is no longer my legal money. It is no longer my actual money. It belongs in law and in fact to the bank. And I have just made it an equal partner in my winnings by so favoring it by making a deposit. Now, apply that same process to $1 trillion of new labor income in Canada every single year. Every time you get your paycheck and you go deposit it, it's now owned literally and actually by the bank, legally.
If you won it, where would you go to cash it without it being taken from you?
No, I would win the cash. Bucket loads of it, like dump trucks full of it.
Yes, but if you won it and you wanted to cash the check, like they gave you a check for 10
Oh, yeah, no, I'm just using this as a...
If they gave you a check for $1 billion, where would you go to cash that in to withdraw it out in cash?
They would... I don't know. It really wasn't the point. It's the fact that the right of property in the money itself is transferred to the bank, and there is no legal or equitable reason for that to be so, and yet we just go along like automatons generation after generation, and nobody... I mean, how can you have something that substantial, that obviously important, like, the $10 billion a day in new interest charges? I mean, it's out by up to $1 billion a day. They're 10% for 40 years, and it now accounts for, we're talking about just that little math error I was telling you about as the second dragon, that with just that little thing, that now accounts for all debt everywhere. Without that math error, based on the payments that have been made, there is no debt. It's that significant. And it gets dismissed as, oh yeah, there's a little bit of a difference, but practically speaking, the difference is disregarded. And you got actual people going out there. If you go take out a payday loan today for $300 and you have to pay $400 in 14 days, that is 180,754%. That is the rate received by the payday loan company. That is what you would have to get on a savings account to be able to withdraw 33% of your money every 14 days. Or just after one 14 days. It doesn't matter whether it's ongoing or it's not. It's like saying, well, a drag racer really isn't going 300 miles an hour because it can only maintain it for a second or two. So you're talking about two different things. You're not talking about... They're constantly confusing in our minds torque for horsepower, speed for acceleration, the feeding schedule of the virus for its rate of growth. Who cares what the feeding schedule is? That is by agreement. At 100% per month, if you feed it once a month, you have to feed it 100% or it's going to double in size on you. If you feed it once every 3 months, you have to feed it 800%. Because it goes from 1 to 2 to 4, or from whatever, however often you feed it. If you only feed it every 6 months, it's going to cost you 51,200%. See, so if you feed it twice a year, it's going to cost you a little over 100,000. But if you wait until the end of the year, it's going to cost you 409,600, about as much. But you go the other way from 100% per month. If you feed it daily, it's only going to cost you just a hair over 1% a day, or 368% total feedings for the year. So based on this virus that is injected into you that grows at a natural rate of 409,600%, the feeding schedule can be anywhere between 368% per year if fed daily to 409,600 if only fed once at the end of the year. And they say that's all you need to know is how much you have to feed it. You are not intelligent enough or competent enough to understand the significance of something as esoteric or arcane as the growth rate of the debt that is consuming your economic body. It's absolutely ridiculous. Well, yeah, we told you that the example I was giving you, 300 for 400 due in 14 days, that is 180,000% per annum. They will tell you it's 870, and half the time they'll tell you it's half that because they can't spit it out. They can't say numbers that big, and they're relying on that. But the thing is that what they're saying is 80% of the global financial industry, we have a fundamental right to charge you 180,000% per annum when we gain your contractual agreement to 870 because we got away for decades with taking 3.1 when we told you it was 3, and we used the same fraudulent formula in both cases. See, at what point do you think these people are going to tell us, oh, sorry, we've been scamming you for decades. We at some point, we're going to tell you that we've been using the wrong formula, the one that's been recognized as criminal and banned outright in the UK for 40 years now. Oh, sorry. You know, instead, we take it to an appellate court system in this country that is absolutely saturated with former financial, corporate, and financial law, firms and this sort of thing. They're all. I mean, Brian Mulroney, he was marketed as a lawyer for the Iron Ore Company of Canada, a labor lawyer, but he was also concurrently a director of the CIBC along with Conrad Black, and they were just doesn't matter. I think I've gone over my 10 minutes, but I'll just get to the last one. The last one is the deposit function. You change that, you change everything. That if I put that $1 billion in the bank is now a trustee of my money. It does not belong to the bank, and that is the big problem with this entire planet. You fix that one problem, you will go a long way to fixing everything. And the final, number 7. The dragon of all dragons is taxation. Nominal taxation, which is the most ridiculous thing in the world. We are a literally incompetent species. Nobody in their right mind would ever set up such a ridiculous system as we have. It's called punitive taxation, and everybody has been conditioned to think that the term punitive taxation means really high taxation, when in fact it is the actual substance of the thing. Taxation does not raise any money for government. It merely and solely destroys it. When you take, if I go out, like it was an associate of mine asked me to look at his mortgage that he had been compelled to give. It was a commercial property in Victoria, and CRA, or not the Canada Revenue Agency, was demanding $3 million from him. And they demanded a mortgage in order to keep the wolf at bay. And then this was back in 2009, I think. And it was, at the time, deposit account rates were 1% what they were paying on it. And they wanted 9% calculated daily, or a real rate of about 9.5%. Now, there was a curious clause in the mortgage that said that that the mortgagor, the debtor, agrees that this mortgage shall represent the debt and shall not be taken to pay the debt only. And there was this other curious thing underneath that said that I hadn't seen before in all these years of reading this kind of stuff. And it said to the effect that the debtor agrees not to ask any questions about what happened to the $3 million of principal. Okay? So I started looking into this, and I thought, well, wait a minute. He actually went out and earned from his various enterprises $3 million. So he's got $3 million in cash. The Crown is holding a mortgage against one of his properties where there's $3 million of room. It was worth about 15, and it only had mortgages of about 12. So there was the $3 million was actual charge against the property when he gave it. Now, yes. Okay. Okay. And so the question is, who benefits and what happens if he pays them? See, the instant that he paid them the $3 million in cash, the $3 million in cash ceased to exist. because it's evidence of Crown debt, and when it gets back to the Crown, it has no legal substance anymore. It's withdrawn from circulation. It's just so much linen or paper in the warehouse. Okay? So what they do is they make him $3 million poorer for the sake of destroying their own tax liability. That's gone. The $3 million tax liability that was outstanding is now gone. The Crown's $3 million mortgage is now gone. And they have to deleverage out of whatever $3 million of investments the Bank of Canada made with the $3 million of capacity that it had received from the mortgage. So objectively, the tax department or the Crown is $9 million poorer the instant it is paid the $3 million in cash. So the Crown is objectively harmed by the taxation, which is not taxation, it is vandalism. Legally, it's vandalism because there's nothing transferred to the Crown. It is the compelled destruction of your purchasing power for its own sake. No rational species would do this. This is just plain. What they're doing is it's the targeted destruction of purchasing power in order to keep the working poor and politically powerless for its own sake. And the fact that it's the same reasoning of these PhD mathematics who can't seem to say, well, yeah, they can give you the 365th root of the number and all the rest of it, but they can't tell the difference between the growth rate of a virus and what you have to feed it. Everything is what's called a systematized delusion. It's a false premise followed by a legitimate chain of reasoning leading to an insane result. That's in a 1912 law dictionary that was particularly appropriate. It describes every function of government, every financial institution on the planet, everything. Systematized delusions. That's all we're dealing with. So, anyway, I hope I've given you a good overview of what's going on out there. And that a lot of times what we're doing is we're getting involved and we deal with the minutia, the little details, when the big stuff is staring us right in the face, and we need to do something about that. I mean, just getting rid of taxation, you just have to change the polarity of the system so that if you earn $100,000, and the government needs 30%, you just earned the right to advance $30,000 of credit to the government. And it's non-callable, non-interest-bearing. Government never has to pay it back. They just have to keep a record of how much you have invested in the country instead of call you a tax creditor or a tax investor instead of a tax debtor. And switch from law to equity. And you change everything. And it's costless. You can do it under the social insurance number system. The infrastructure is already there. You can change it tomorrow with the stroke of a pen. Amen. I'll leave you with that.